Don Quixote. Sancho Panza lived a quiet life in the Spanish countryside, tending his crops and looking after his 7 goats and 12 chickens, and he was content. But one morning a stranger arrived and changed his life forever. The stranger was old and frail, but he had a strength about him. There he sat on his skinny horse, dressed in an armour like the knights of old, pointing a bony finger at Sancho Panza. "You there? Good man," he called. No one had ever stopped to talk to Sancho or called him a good man, so this was quite a surprise. "Me?" Sancho looked around. "Yes, dear fellow, you probably recognize me. I am Don Quixote de la Mancha." "Oh, that's nice. I'm Sancho Panza. Nice to meet you." "I am a knight of the realm. My virtue bids me to save the forlorn and overlooked." "You what?" replied Sancho, scratching his head. Forgive me, what I do is to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves." "Oh, that's nice." "My bravery is well known in these lands."
Well, what was the name again?"
"Don Quixote."
"No."
De la Mancha."
"I can't say I've..."
I'm the Knight of the Long Face."
"No, definitely not."
"Lots of people know me." Sancho Panza shrugged his shoulders, and Don Quixote seemed a little upset. It is of no matter," he said, sitting up straight in his saddle. Sancho scratched his head. The old man looked familiar, but he couldn't place where he'd seen him before. Meanwhile, Don Quixote climbed clumsily off his horse and towards the farmer, his rusted armour clunking and scraping noisily. Bits of it were falling off, and much of it was held together with old string. "Sancho Panza," said Don Quixote, placing a bony hand on the farmer's rounded shoulder, "for me to fight the good fight, I require a squire."
Sancho laughed. "That rhymes. Do you require a squire?" "Yes, sir, a squire for hire I do require."
"Sancho, when you've quite finished."
"Sorry."
Don Quixote leaned in and whispered, "I have a mission so dangerous I cannot undertake it alone." Sancho Panza's days consisted mostly of planting seeds and feeding animals, so the idea of an adventure sounded too good to turn down.
"I might be interested," he said. "What's the pay?"
"It is for the honour, Sancho Panza."
"So no pay?"
"For the honour alone," replied Don Quixote, holding out his hand to shake. Sancho thought about it for a few moments and then shrugged. "All right." "Excellent. Now, bring food, water, and weapons, and load up your faithful steed. We must be off at once."
"Right-o," said Sancho enthusiastically. "Oh, I'll get me donkey."
Off they set to the southern hills, an old man in a knight's costume and a farmer with no idea what he was doing or why. When they reached the highest point, they could see that on each hilltop stood a windmill with large sails circling slowly in the breeze. "There they are, Sancho Panza. What say you now of our mission?"
"I'm not sure. What am I looking at?"
"Why, giants, of course. There must be 30 of them, vile beasts." Sancho could see no giants, only 7 windmills. Don Quixote was shaking his head in wonder. "Look at their arms. They must be 6 miles wide."
What, the sails?"
Do not fear, faithful squire. This is nothing I haven't faced before."
"Well, you fought windmills? I mean, you fought giants?"
"No, never, but I have read a great deal about them."
Said Sancho, scratching his head.
"So, let's go," said Don Quixote triumphantly, whipping the reins of his horse and thundering off at top speed, shouting, "For my lady Dulcinea!" Sancho Panza watched as Don Quixote attacked the nearest windmill with a long stick. The knight quickly got caught in the sails and was catapulted from his horse into the air before falling rather painfully to the ground.
"Sire, are you okay?" said Sancho, out of breath.
"Damn the enchanter. He saw us coming and transformed the giants into windmills. Typical."
"Yes, sire,"
said Sancho, worried that Don Quixote had banged his head. "It will take more than a little magic to stop me from my quest," said Don Quixote, struggling to his feet. Then he spotted something over Sancho's shoulder and stood bolt upright, pointing to the next hillside. Sancho followed the direction of Don Quixote's finger to see two large flocks of sheep being led into a large open grazing pasture. "Sheep, master?" "That's what the enchanter wants you to believe, Sancho. Avast! We must stop this battle with haste. These two armies must not fight." "Armies? Fight?" But Don Quixote was already back on his horse and riding at full speed. "But they're sheep, master," cried Sancho, who shook his head and clambered onto his donkey to try and catch up. The two sheep farmers were happily tending to their herds when they saw a crazed old man in a knight's costume riding towards their flocks, shouting manically. They shouted for him to stop, but he clearly hadn't heard, so they started pelting rocks and stones to get his attention. A couple of the stones hit Don Quixote in the head, and he lost his balance and fell out of his saddle. He hit the ground and then rolled down the hill, gathering speed as he went, leaving a trail of rusted armor and string on the hillside. Sancho ran to Don Quixote, who finally stopped rolling at the bottom of the hill. "What were you thinking, sire? Running at those poor sheep?" "The evil enchanter turned the armies into sheep, did he? A worthy opponent." Don Quixote shook his fist angrily in the air. "This isn't over. I have sworn to protect the peace." Then he managed a faint moan before passing out completely. For 2 more days, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza roamed the southern hills. They set free a band of robbers on their way to prison, who then robbed them. Then the following day they found a man running through the hills, sick with grief after his love had left him for another. "Ah, this makes me think of mine own true love," said Don Quixote. "I must send news to Dulcinea." "But isn't it dinner time?" "You're right, Sancho. You must take my horse. Ride to the local inn with this note. Fetch supplies while you are there." Don Quixote scribbled a note on a large piece of parchment and handed it to Sancho. Sancho looked at the note, which read, "Sweet Dulcinea, promise you will be mine. Yours forever, Don Quixote, the Knight of the Long Face." A couple of questions. Who is Dulcinea?" asked Sancho. "How will I find her? And do you think they have grilled lamb at this inn?" Don Quixote's eyes softened. He looked at the sky, picturing his true love's face. "Dulcinea has a beauty more radiant than the sun. You will know her. Now go. I await her reply." After a short ride, when Sancho Panza arrived at the inn, he was stopped by the local priest. "You ride Señor Quesada's horse. He has been missing for a week. What do you know, farmer?" Sancho Panza explained everything that had happened, and the priest told Sancho that a local nobleman called Alonso Quesada had gone quite mad from reading too many adventure stories and now believed he was an olden-day knight. "Señor Quesada from the big house by the orchard. I knew he looked familiar," said Sancho. Yes, but where is he now?" asked the priest. "In the woods, but he told me to come and buy lots of food. Oh, and to give this note to his sweetheart, Dulcinea. Do you know her?" "There is no Dulcinea," explained the priest. "There is a local peasant girl that the foolish old man has decided is a beautiful princess, but it is all in his mind. We must help him. Take me to him so we can get him home to rest." "Well, he doesn't seem tired," said Sancho. "But he is an old man," said the priest, shaking his head sadly. Sancho shrugged his shoulders. "Okay, but he seems quite happy, though, if you ask me." "You do not know what is best for him, farmer. His family want him home, and we must obey their wishes." Sancho understood, but he couldn't help wondering about Don Quixote's wishes. Didn't it matter what he wanted? Sancho led the priest and his horse and cart back to the riverside. The priest then told Don Quixote that Dulcinea sent her love and gave the old man the good news that the land was now free of giants, and it was thanks to the bravery of Don Quixote, the Knight of the Long Face.
"Well, that's me," said Don Quixote. So Dulcinea, she loves me?"
"Oh, yes, very much," lied the priest.
"And I saved the land from the enchanter?"
"You did, my brave sir."
"So I have done my part. I am victorious."
Don Quixote's heart swelled with pride. He smiled for a few moments, and then his expression turned to a frown. He slumped a little, a quizzical look on his long face. Sancho Panza thought he suddenly looked older and very tired. He helped the old man to sit in the back of the priest's cart, and with the gentle rumble of the wheels on the dirt road, Don Quixote quickly fell asleep. When they arrived at his home, Sancho and the priest carried the old man to his bed, and he slept like a baby through the night. His family was so relieved to see him safe at home. Sancho Panza slept by his master's bedside that night and woke up to see Don Quixote awake at first light.
"Don Quixote, my master, you're awake."
But the old man shook his head.
"My good fellow, I am your master no more. Don Quixote is gone. I am Alonso Quixote."
Sancho could sense sadness in the proud man.
"But sire, what about the giants and the enchanter and fighting for honor?"
Alonso sighed deeply, his voice small and weak.
"Oh, good farmer, my story is over. I have fought my last battle. Let the enchanter come."
Sancho Panza felt a tear coming to his eye.
"But, master, there are still rights to be wronged in this world. Perhaps we could go on more adventures." "No, Sancho Panza. It is time I lay down my sword."
Alonso Quixote looked to the priest in the doorway.
"Priests, please bear witness that I leave money to my friend Sancho Panza, and the rest to my daughter and her family, so they can all live a long and happy life."
The priest nodded, and Alonso Quixote closed his eyes and breathed his last breath. Many tears were cried for this man who was missed by all he knew, not because he always did what he was supposed to do, but because he lived the life that he chose, and he made sure that every day was an adventure.